Good evening and welcome to the Social Newsroom. Our episode this evening is focusing on state capture, whether the Kenyan media has been captured, state, commercial, or otherwise. So we do have some veteran journalists and industry players who have a thought or two to share in terms of experience and also what they have observed, not just in the recent wake of the Gen Z-led protests that we have had here in the country and that are reported to still continue with Nane Nane on Thursday, but as well looking back into time as to how the state capture, what form and shape it has taken over time, and what can be done by the practitioners. That is the fourth estate, which has a role and a duty to the public, first of all, to keep them informed, as well as the authorities to keep them accountable. And that is why we have this conversation today. So I'd like to introduce Victor Bwire. He is a Director of Media Training and Development at the Media Council of Kenya, and a good friend of mine and my senior in the profession. I'd like to also introduce Wayua Muli, who is a former colleague at the Nation Media Group, which should probably say something now that we're former colleagues. It speaks about the landscape of the industry. It's really changing, and we still have word of 300 or so from the Standard Media Group who will be leaving soon owing to a layoff in the difficult times. Wayua Muli is also a veteran journalist and has been working on some facts over time, historical as well, having come from a family of journalists and seen the forms that state capture can take towards media. And my namesake, one of the very few people I have met that bear the same name that I do, that is Masai, Mr. Martin Masai, a veteran journalist as well, and a trustee with the Kenya Editors Guild. He is joining us virtually because he is in Machakos, wasn't able to join us physically. But thank you nonetheless. This is a social newsroom, so we're able to even interact on the social media platforms. And we have you joining us as well on YouTube live stream, and make your comments clear and make them free flowing as we continue with the conversation. Feel free to discuss and give your contribution, whether you feel that the fourth estate, journalism has been captured in Kenya. And this is with the entry point in conversation starting from what we have experienced with the Gen Z-led protests that at first were against the finance bill and also taking the form and shape of going against the governance system of Kenya and calling the authorities to act on the mismanagement that has been witnessed over the years and saying enough is enough. Well, we've seen the very latest of what has come out of that, and that is a vetting of CSs, various CSs. And I don't know whether we'll start the interview now in fashion of the vetting sessions and say how much we're worth. Wayua, you want to start? But Wayua, thank you for joining us. In your view, is there state capture of the fourth estate of media in Kenya?
I would say there definitely is. We've seen a lot of recent events. Some of them are soft capture. We've got a lot of journalists who have formed very close relationships with politicians, and this tends to affect the quality of the work that they do. We've also seen government policies such as setting up an advertising agency, the Government Advertising Agency, that took 75% of advertising revenues from, especially the big media houses. So the Nation Media Group, the Standard, they've really suffered as a result. We've seen them lay off journalists like literally every year. It's become an annual event, and this speaks to their financial situation. Advertising is the mainstay of legacy media. It's how you support print, it's how you support radio. These are huge infrastructure projects. It's not the same thing as setting up a digital newsroom where you can be one person with a phone, some podcast equipment, and you're good to go, right? When you've got thousands of employees to support, you definitely need that advertising. So there is that. We've seen a lot of regulatory issues come up. We've seen the government try to shut down the press. Sometimes these are explicit orders, from certain politicians, certain county governments, governors, for example. Sometimes it is express orders from the powers that be that say, shut this down, do not say this. We saw that with the protests. when they sent out a notice and said you can't air the demonstrations. I believe, in fact, we also saw a reporter get shut down live on TV while she was asking questions. So it's that sort of thing that lends me to say, yes, there definitely is state capture, and there have been attempts to extend it. Not always successful, but they are still there.
Okay. So in your view, you see it manifesting in one form or another.
Yeah.
To you, Victor, in your view as, first of all, as a journalist and even as a media counsel, is it something that you can say is existent?
I think if state capture is there, Mark, then it has been there. It's a very structural. If it has been there, then has been there, including in our own laws that media and journalists participated in making, and they have never raised it. Because looking at what has happened, for example, and what you have mentioned, what does the program code of broadcasters say on live broadcasts? It's in the law, and we accepted it. And it says there's no instantaneous live broadcast in this country. Check the programming code.
So what you're saying is it normally has a delay. That's what you mean?
7 seconds delay is standard.
Okay.
And you have worked with the colleagues, you can ask in other media houses, international media, ask, BBC, ask them. No instantaneous live broadcast. There's always a delayed response. And it's in our program code.
Yes.
Which journalists participated and never raised a question.
For the value of the layman, that delay is in place. Why?
The delay is normally to give the editor, the producer, time to make a decision why that will allow that speech or photo online or control. Because, Mark, it can be a hate speech. It can be a dangerous speech somebody's making. And now you are given space. It can be somebody being shot live. So the producer is given that decision to make, should I allow that on air or not? That's principally what the delayed response is, what it means. And so when it was accepted that it's part of the program code, and those are discussions that must be made, because look at the program code for broadcasters and look at the code of ethics for the practice of journalism in Kenya. So in Kenya, we run two parallel systems because media owners, the law had required that if we are already regulated, because content issues are supposed to be regulated by the Media Council of Kenya, but when CEA is giving their program conditions, because they are the ones who give frequencies to broadcasters,
licenses,
they also gave their what they are calling licensing conditions. So you accept, you are taking a license, and you will accept the following things. Now, there's a provision that if the media owners at that time had written to CEA and said, we are already regulated by the Code of Ethics under the Media Council of Kenya, the program code will never have come into force.
Okay.
But we didn't, the industry didn't do, so we have a country that runs two parallel codes, the Code of Ethics for the practice of journalism in Kenya, and when broadcasters go to get a license, they also accept they will be regulated by the programming code, which then talks about the 7 seconds delay. That's why when the broadcasting of live was done, the Media Council reminded the people of the Code of Ethics and what it says about conflicts reporting, what about it says reporting on the war front. You don't, we didn't say stop live broadcasting. We said be reminded of the code, the specific actions on the reporting from the war front, reporting from conflict, and what it says.
Okay.
And these are things people have been taught when, for example, you are reporting in a conflict, you don't show somebody hitting somebody, you don't show somebody killing somebody. That are purely Code of Ethics things. It has gone. But under the program code, the CA also expects broadcasters who they are licensees to observe one or two things. But you start understanding the folly of some of those things because the reminders are there. But remember, and I've written a paper actually, Media Regulation in a Changing Environment, that while you are telling broadcasters to observe the program code and don't stop live broadcasting, remember most of our broadcasters have moved to YouTube. They are already online. So who are you stopping? So, and these are the discussion. In fact, in one of my latest article yesterday, I was talking about all regulatory approaches to a new system, to a new media environment. The environment has changed that now people must relook at the code of ethics, must look at the programming code. Is it still relevant, or what do we change? What don't we change? Right. But if we get it's so that's why I'm talking about structural, because government can say, but it's in their law. They accepted this law. So we have for example, the newspapers. We still have the Books and Newspaper Act in this country. What does it say? So they can do something, but this act has been there. We are not implementing something outside, extrajudicial. It's already in the act. The program code says live broadcast. They even go to the Terrorism Act, Prevention of Terrorism Act 2012. Look at article, section 30, that one, what it says about some of this. So there are a lot of things. There are 21 laws in this country. Outside, we talk about Article 33, 34, and 35. These good laws, we have the best in the world. But we have other 21 laws that negate those through in a big way. Okay. That's why this year, why was Kenya rated number 97 or something in the Reporters Without Borders? If we have the best Bill of Rights, we have the best article. Why are we rated number 97 out of the world in terms of press freedom? Because we still have 21 laws that negate those 3 laws that we mention all the time. And that's why there has been need for an engagement that how do we improve the work? The SKICA, the Kenya Information Amendment Act, it has weird provisions. There is now, look at even the KBC Act. What does Article 33 say about KBC? It ought to be as public broadcast. Right. Is still being run under KBC Act? You know, and the others, and you can mention the 21 laws that we are talking. Look at even our penal code, section 60, look at 60, 61, 62. We still have laws called publication of false news in this country in our penal code. So even without going to the Computer Misuse and Cyber Act, without even going to the program code, somebody will just go back to the penal code, looks at section 66, publication of false news. We still even have laws that talk about if you publish something about a foreign president. Look at our penal code. We still have 1952 sections in our laws currently, even as we talk about this progressive 33, 34, and 35. So we must have a holistic relook at how our ethical, and obviously now with the changed media landscape, people are still even discussing, look at UNESCO, what does the law in Kenya describe a journalist to be? And what does, for example, UNESCO describe a journalist to be? So the scene has changed so much, more than so that the police approach to regulating media can never work. Nowadays, like you mentioned, I get my news on phone in my bedroom. Yeah. The way the regulatory system is today, under either CA or Media Council Act, is somebody must make a mistake, somebody notices it, then we come for, a very police approach. Yeah. But how will you get me when I'm in my bedroom, watching Netflix? So we must relook. In fact, in other jurisdictions right now, like South Africa, they have introduced a social media council, but which will never work. But in countries where there's progress, people are now talking about media and digital literacy. Let's educate people to become responsible users and consumers of content. Government can no longer police what you watch, because you can't. Even if today's CA wanted to put you off, even what they were saying, they told Citizen, whatever the people were mentioning. But Citizen already on YouTube, it's already on the other platform. How will you stop it? So those are some of the challenges we are talking about, that we must relook at how. But the issues of state capture and related, it's not just media alone. There's even state capture of institutions, there's state capture of individuals. So media is just part of a society. So the struggle we are having about fighting state capture, how do you talk about we don't have state, in a country where journalists go for a year without being paid? I'm struggling about my lunch, I'm struggling about my rent. So we must restart and look at how do we enumerate journalists. In countries where we're talking about press, independent, free press freedom, Norway, journalists are paid well. And you can stop somebody. But in a country where people are not paid for or are still paid per ruler or per an article, or even that pay is not there, somebody is struggling to take a kid in school. So these are things that we must discuss, not just about state capture, but what is the industry itself doing to insulate journalists against this state capture. Okay.
MB says the guy is talking too much. Give others a chance. So wacha tulie kidogo, tumpe Martin opportunity, because you bring up points in terms of the law, and sometimes perhaps It's not the lack of laws. It has been there. It's probably the knowledge that this exists in terms of the ecosystem of the media. Martin, from what you've heard from Wayua and Victor Bwire, in your view and with what has been experienced in the last few, I'm looking at the side because he's on our screen here, what have you witnessed or do you think there's any form of state capture of the media in Kenya at the moment?
Thank you, Mark. I think the issue of media capture is beyond state capture, because from where I sit, I see that media is encircled by circumstances. The state has its interests, commercial interests are there. The practitioners ourselves, we have captured this industry to probably terminal levels. Corruption is stifling media freedom. You may say that corruption has captured the media. We have political capture, alliances where you find media houses are aligned to political factions. We have ownership, media ownership. It has captured media operations. There is economic capture of the media. And so the media, much as we clamor for freedoms, much as we keep on speaking about Article 33, Article 34 and 35, that's not enough. We may have those constitutional guarantees, but it's not sufficient to set media free because of the environment that we have in the years. We can't quite say that this is the freedom that we require as media operators. I've heard my brother Victor speak about 21 statutes that chip away on the freedoms guaranteed on Article 33, 34, and 35. But I would just even want to zero in on the Media Act, Media Council of Kenya Act, wherein you find the Code of Conduct for the Practice of Journalists, where that code has about 26 elements.
25.
That try to confine what a journalist does. And I think that code is there. And I think that this code, sometimes you need to keep reviewing it to see how relevant it is, because I probably think it's now about 10 years, Victor, yes, since it was enacted. Yes. And there are emerging situations. In the morning today, I saw a post from the Gen Zs complaining about media not covering, not giving instantaneous in terms of giving voices to the voiceless. Then you find that we are listeners, our viewers, that we are trustworthy, our viewers, that we are trustworthy messengers, that we give to them that is factual, that is accurate, that is relevant, that is timely, because timeliness is a key thing in journalism. These 21 statutes that my brother Victor has spoken about shows you that the whole state machinery is mobilized now and even in the past, like the Official Secrets Act, an act put into our statutes before some of us were born. It shows there is constant mobilization to limit media space. And I think we just need to learn as media practitioners. I normally remember at a personal level. This line, I think it was in Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, that when man learned how to shoot without missing, then birds also learned how to fly without perching. And I think for us as practitioners, we need to learn the ropes and see how we maneuver around this. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Martin, joining us from Machakos there for your initial thoughts on state capture. And you say that it does exist in one way or form or another. Macharia Gaido is watching, another senior in the profession, and he's been in literal state capture, if you could call it that, a few weeks back, in so-called mistaken identity. He was arrested by police officers, at least that's what we are made to believe afterwards. And they said, oh, sorry, it was a wrong Macharia, and apologies for that. But in and of itself, would you say that is a form of state capture? I'll start with you then, I'll start with you, Wayua, then to you, Victor, because it speaks about the safety of journalists and how they feel when they go to the field, that, hey, if my senior Macharia Gaido can be captured, if Catherine Wanjeri, who was in Nakuru covering the protest, is shot at, then what does that mean for me? So what's your view on that before I read his comment?
Well, I think definitely using security forces to to enforce the silence of journalists, right, puts that at risk in general. As we've seen, this isn't the first time that this has happened. We've had a lot of investigative journalists in the past who have been kidnapped, tortured, they have been sued for criminal libel. So definitely using security forces, putting journalists in the path of physical harm is another way to instill fear. So the net result is that the journalists now start to self-censor. Okay, you don't want to say anything that will put you in trouble. You don't want to put the media house in trouble. And for various other reasons, you know, restrictions on advertising in case you write something about the state that is offensive to the state. So here we are. It is extremely insidious, and it is not good for, you know, holding our government accountable and allowing journalists to report the truth about what is actually going on. Because like I said, self-censorship is a thing.
Right. I don't know, Victor, from your standpoint as Media Council, if there were any complaints to intimidation for media practitioners, journalists and whatnot in this last few weeks of the protest period.
There have been. I mean, my worry, is largely about impunity. Because when we have cases of so many journalists, including Senior Macharia, who were arrested in front and no action is taken, then it becomes very worrying. And that's what the worry we have at the Media Council. It's not about so much, but it's the impunity, the attacks, harassment, intimidation of journalists, the misuse of journalists, but which nobody seems to care. And many times this becomes a very big problem. I can tell you for the last 7 or 8 years, even the UNESCO Secretary General has asked the Kenya government to say what happened to Francis Nyaruri, who was killed in 2009 in Kisii. There is the journalist who died who was killed in Eldoret.
Yes.
Yeah. We have Brian who was killed, who died under mysterious Songa in Mombasa. We have Marsha John, Mombasa again. So it's not one case, it's not two cases.
Yeah.
I mean, we have quite a number of cases where journalists obviously died under mysterious. We have journalists who have even fled this country, Omombara, Purity Mwambia, who no longer live in this country, and others. I know when I was working in some other organization, every time they did an investigative serious story, we had to take them out of this country for 2-3 months at a very, very high cost. I can tell you. So this is something I've seen. Even today, I see it on the African Distress Network, the body in Africa that helps journalists, not just in Kenya and several. And we see these things. I was an investigative journalist myself in Nation, and I can tell you, Masai, I have a bullet wound. At some stage, my kids were kidnapped from school. I mean, the many stories that were killed, the many threats, the many times unknown people went to threaten my parents at home. I mean, we went through all those things. So it's a difficult time many times. But what we are seeing, what my worry is, and it's a general thing, we evacuate journalists from US, we evacuate journalists from all countries for safety reasons. The support system is so weak for journalists in Kenya, or non-existent, to a level where when you're attacked, you remain alone. So you have one, you have media support groups that will issue a statement here and there, but eventually you have to remain. You have a family maybe to feed. You have more security to care about because you don't know even what will happen to you next. And you are in that state, and there's no support system. Even where people have tried, like KUJ and other people, to go to court on behalf of journalists, these cases just die. We have, I mean, protests up to today, we have 24 or 25 cases. We have documented of journalists who were attacked, equipment destroyed, beaten. We have written to IPOA, we have written to the Director of Public Prosecutions. And you see, Media Council is a civilian organization. Once we have written to the relevant investigative institutions, to where police are involved, we have written to the Inspector General, we have written to IPOA, we have written to the Director of Public Security, and given specific cases. And you are told investigation is going on, or we never got witnesses. So sometimes it's so frustrating, even more than some of you, because some of us, I mean, and the colleagues at the institutions, you have principally to do things that are now sometimes personal.
Right.
This is a colleague who got injured, he's in hospital. We end up even spending our own personal money to support colleagues because they're our colleagues. So some of these things are very difficult, and we have to routinely take our own officers, security officers, for trauma counseling, where you have run, a journalist has been shot at, you are trying, you have reported, where you think you have done the best you can do, but principally, no, nothing happens. But some of these cases, like you mentioned, like we do a lot of work, but some of these things are also safety issues. Yeah. You don't announce what you have done, but equally, you have a very hostile clientele, the journalists who think you are doing nothing. But you see, as a civilian organization, Media Council, once you have collected that case, the evidence, and given to the respective institutions, in the investigation institutions, at that level, you have even worked with other private institutions to even get private prosecutions.
Right.
At that level, what else do you do? You know, you also now, you have pushed yourself to that level, but it's so challenging. The level of intimidation, harassment, attacks, and vulnerability journalists in Kenya is so high.
And that's the form of state capture, in a way.
That 3 years ago,
yes,
we were number 60, we were number 60-something in the global ranking of press freedom. Right now, today, the report that came out last week, we are 97. We are going down, even with the 3 laws we mention all the time. Yeah. Even as we talk about a very free media in Kenya, we have 299 radio stations, we have 135 TV stations, 15,000 journalists. But that's just numbers. Right. You know, it doesn't translate in the safety, it doesn't translate in the independence of journalists, it doesn't even translate in the payment of journalists, because what most of these radios, I mean, TV stations, even the vernacular, they will pick Mark Masai's story, publish in a newspaper, reproduce it in all their vernacular, and they don't pay you anything. Yet we are talking about an expanding media space. Media space, by numbers only, does not mean. We can only talk about that strength, independency of journalists when we have strong journalists who are paid well, who are respected, who are allowed to do their work independently. And I saw last week, I was joking, where go to even our media houses. The advertising departments are red carpets, third floor. Editorial is the mainstay of most of these media. I worked in Nation myself. Is no carpet, no nothing. Even the treatment journalists are given almost tells you, when people are being, a professional person who has a master's, who has a PhD, is being paid by a measurement of a ruler or a clip that is paid 250. A photographer who takes critical photos that are won CNN awards, Media Council awards, but the photo, a front page photo of a newspaper, you are only paid 250.
Right.
Now, how many times do you have photos? So that's a person who averagely goes home with 3,000 shillings. So, and that's the typical state we are talking about.
Can I stop you on that point and just ask for a direct answer in terms of state capture, where it is said the government agencies and instead of that, and even now directing all the advertising to KBC, for instance, is that a form?
I don't speak obviously on behalf of government, but what I know in the discussion on behalf of government, we've been there is that once mandated to clear all the monies owed to media houses, because part of the reason why people think the serious state, the media owners have made it like government, you owe us, that's why we are unable to pay our staff, and why. But some of us who know, and Martin, you will confirm here, some of that billions owed is just a smoke screen, because we have seen media houses that are paid money, but they never pay their staff. So we must also look at accountability within newsrooms.
Within the media.
How far are CEOs, editors in charge of this newsroom also caring about their staff? We have never had an editor say, my reporters have not been paid for 2 months, they are going on a strike. I mean, because some of these things, we must take them. We have discussed the issue of where if an editor, and there's nothing wrong, somebody being paid high. If I'm an editor being paid 1 million shillings and I have staff who are being paid 25,000 shillings, where's the morality? That sometimes we say, at what level are we going to do such a thing? So we must also be caring people.
Advertising. And sometimes it is made to look as if it is the business of only the big media houses, but by the way, I need to say I am editorial director of a radio station called Bwire FM. And to my dismay, a few months ago, we got a letter cancelling our tender to advertise with government advertising agency. So we are equally concerned because government is the biggest advertiser, and that is public money. And I think all media organizations that pay taxes, they have a good sense of entitlement to the cake baked by the government advertiser. And I think when media houses are prevented from accessing that cake, that's a form of media harassment. It is an affront to media freedom because some content is changed by media houses in an attempt to make sure that they access this cake. So however we look at it, there needs to be a better regime in managing government advertising so that this cake reaches out to media houses at the center in Nairobi and in the counties where some of us operate, because this cake is baked out of our taxes and everybody pays taxes. And I think the biggest form of media capture that is existing now is being denied a government advertising. There is also this case of Macharia Gaido. Whoever it is, police, CI, the DCI, they must have identified a highly visible journalist, a highly respected, visible journalist for harassment, in the hope that if they can capture Macharia, who else can they harass?
Yeah.
And this business of so-called professional DCI that we have loaned, including Kenya Police Service, we have loaned to Haiti people because it's a professional police service. Professional that it can arrest the most visible, one of the most visible journalists by mistake. And a few months back, they killed a Pakistani journalist,
yes,
also by mistake. This is a professional police. And so I imagine that when the target is that high, it's not just targeted at that particular individual. It is targeted across the industry. And the story of intimidating the media is quite old. I have been in media now, this is my 41st year. And in a matter of years, I had to change my byline to exist just because of this intimidation. And just like I said a little earlier, as things go on, as matters get more dynamic, I think as a practitioners, which we hardly do, we need to sit and replan how we are going to handle our profession in the face of emerging challenges. At the Kenya Editors Guild, for instance, and I chair the Ethics and Media Freedom Committee at the Guild, at the height of this Gen Z protests, we did hold a meeting, a forum, to engage journalists on how they're going to engage the protests and the police so that they're not on harm's way. We normally say, editors say this every other time, that there's no story that is worth one's life. And so safety is important to journalists as they do their job. And it is necessary that as they do this job, they are equipped with the right gadgets to do this job, so that you don't send a journalist to cover riots, tear gas is all over, and this person doesn't have a mask. And I'm not talking about the mask that we use for COVID. Some professional thing, a helmet, and some running gear, including bulletproof vests.
Right.
So that if you are hit by mistake, then you are safe.
Right. Thank you for that. And Wayua, there's something you've been working on to look at from back in the day, not just what's happening today with the ongoing protests, the Gen Z-led protests that have come to be known, but the form of state capture and what it has been over time. To what end is this? First of all, how far back do you go, and what inspires this, and to what end?
Okay, so I think for me, the key starting point is with the Moi government, because this is when we had really silent capture. Remember, we didn't have social media back in the day, so you couldn't tell what Moi was doing in one part of the country unless you had relatives or friends. And also because we had the special branch, back in the day, you never knew which wall was listening in on your story. So we couldn't speak to each other about these things at all. And then the Kibaki government came in, and like Mr. Bwire has pointed out, Kibaki just really didn't care about the press. He just wanted to do a job, and he wanted his ministers to do their work.
Well, his family did, if you know. They even stormed some media houses. They cared about
Okay, well, yes. Lucy
Yes.
Kibaki was actually very vocal about her
God rest
dislike
his
of the
soul,
media,
please,
And then the new constitution came in 2010 and changed a lot of the landscape for us, including our relations with, the state and the state with the media. But then also, now that, one of the things that the Kibaki government did that probably worked against government was to give us some of the best internet in the world. So we grew really fast, and information started spreading faster. Kenya was such an early adapter. We probably were the first country to get, WhatsApp or whatever in the world, because we worked that efficiently. And so the Jubilee government didn't have a choice but to play nice in public. I tweeted the other day about the very first thing they did with the media. They held that infamous breakfast of theirs, and basically made friends with the media. But then after that, it got worse, because one of the things that Uhuru Kenyatta personally did was not only did he charm journalists to their faces, but then behind their backs, he called the media names. Now, he said, Gazetenia, Kufunga Nyama, for example, pretty much called us useless. Now, what happens is when you have a president as charming and as personable, and someone that we all respected at the time, before the 2017 elections, when he calls the media names, now what happens is that the public stops trusting us. So it doesn't matter how true or how well researched your stories are or your content is, the media already, sorry, the public already has this perception of you, and they have decided we're no longer listening to you. So it goes all the way back through the different phases of the relationships that we've had. What I want to do is I want to put it together. It is important to remember the history of the media and the history of Kenya. And I don't think that many people have put both of them in one context. If we do not understand our past, then it's going to be very difficult to change our future. We need to know where we're coming from. We need to know why the relationships are the way that they are with the police, you know, with government, with governors, with county governments who are also exercising, you know, the power to shut down advertising whenever they feel like it.
Right.
And remember, governors tend to have closer relationships with their media people than say the president does. Because the president has a relationship with all 50 million of us. A governor has a relationship with the very few people who live in their county. So accessing the media and having the media access them is so much easier. And a lot of these battles become very, very personal. So, you know, if a governor doesn't like something that, let's say, the Standard Group or the Nation Media Group did,
the correspondent will have it coming. Exactly.
So they summon you, and I've seen this happen in newsrooms. They summon you and they tell you to shut it down or make personal threats, so there is a lot that needs to be said. We also need to look at the you know, history of PV, why we adhere to the code of ethics that we do, the effect that the media had on PV reporting. A lot of people said at the time in 2007 that we let it get too far with our reporting. A lot of vernacular stations, for example, came on board and were very incendiary in their reports. So it's things like these that we're trying to shut down, but it's also the importance that PV has played on media and the way that media operate issue, with the Nation Media Group running a photo of a dead woman on page 1. And at the time, it also caused us those things that I'd like to document and put on in a book for posterity and for remembrance.
Are you able, whether things are getting better or worse in terms of state capture of media?
I would say right now, if it continues like this, it's going to get much, much worse, because the government is exercising an extremely heavy hand, you know, on the media. And I don't see that changing, not until the next elections, and maybe, for example, Ruto will go in 2027. But if that doesn't happen, if he continues into a second term, I can guarantee you it's going to get much, much worse, because this will be his last term. He won't be seeking re-election, and he can pretty much do what he wants. You know, he has no one to seek favor from. He has no need for Kenyans anymore. How much worse do you think it'll get?
And in your view,
in newsrooms, and they have simply continued the relationship and made it formal. So yes, we have violated our own code of ethics, made it formal. So yes, we have violated our own code of ethics. Sometimes I really can't blame someone who's looking for promotion or you know, a salary or to raise the standard of living. But we need to have these conversations within ourselves, because corruption isn't necessarily about how much money you're paid. It is about the fact that you can be corrupted.
Okay, and I'd be careful as well. The new CS is coming into town. They might be considering you for work, so you don't want to come back and, you know, defend what you had said earlier. However, there are guidelines as to how we interact with our newsmakers. We have 15 minutes to go, but there is a question here to whether journalists, and you talk to them in your capacity as Director of Media Training and Development, whether journalists actually bring it upon themselves in terms of the state capture. So sometimes you're so close to them, they know everything about you, they make you think you know everything about them, but at the end of the day, probably using you. That is, I'm talking about power.
You know, one of the things that we brush over is what level of influence do journalists have in the media in this country?
Okay.
Because Mark, or you are Mark, sometimes you are more frustrated than even people know. How many journalists have written articles, deep investigative, You leave the newsroom, you even don't know the headline tomorrow. You are managing editor, you know those things.
Yeah.
And the headline is changed after you have left. When you come back, how do you feel? You know, you are so journalists sometimes are so powerless in some of these media things that sometimes we over-expect from them. That Mark, you do your story, and like in this platform where you are doing, you bring your story. There are gatekeeping issues where you bring your story and your level is just that, and you leave. You even don't know how many journalists, and I mean a lot of journalists chats where they ask, will my story be used? You're even not sure if your story will be used, because even the way, the judgment, the criteria for picking stories is even unknown to yourself, that once you do your story, that level of frustration is among so many journalists. And that sometimes when we see people pushing them to a level, okay, they will take blame because they are journalists, but they are more frustrated than even the people who consume our products. Because of the way you have talked about state capture. Have you talked about ownership structure? Have you talked about advertising terrorism? Have you talked about, so that at what level that sometimes journalists only play 12% of what happens in the media?
Right.
That sometimes nowadays, there was the rule of 60-40. Right now, what is happening, that stories must go to advertising to know what you are not hammering the advertisers. So that stories, so decisions are made based on who are we hurting, not about the public interest in that story. And this sometimes are beyond journalists. I mean, I've worked in a newsroom myself. I have seen colleagues who are equally frustrated. They have done our story for 3 months, a good public interest story. But they are told, look at Purity Mwambia's story took how long? I mean, you know it. And it took a decision of an editor one day who said outside the normal editorial process, I ran this story and let whatever happen. Because through the normal editorial decisions, the story was not just running. And other more stories that journalists do risk their own lives, but they can. Look at the history of how John Allan Namu and Mohammed Ali left the newsroom, and where you think, but there are structures. I did personal stories that have never run up. Today, I still have them, where I have consulted with old editors, they have guided me, I've done deep stories, but if you are just told, that story will run another day, and it just takes 3-4 years. What goes through my mind as a journalist who went through those stories, interviewed people who keep calling me and asking me, you interviewed us, when would that story run? You know, you feel so hopeless. And yet, when you went there, so that sometimes, like you said, we expect from journalists sometimes that some of the decisions that are made in that newsroom are beyond journalists, that they are journalists, your contract is, your work will be to collect, and bring stories, and the issue of publishing the story lies beyond yourself.
Brazil Musumba has a question for you. What can the Media Council and other professional groups do to media practitioners who have decided to go to bed with politicians at county and national level, either as bloggers and paid-up propagandists?
One of the things, Mark, we have said, and we have interacted with the owners. You know, one, we gave, thanks Brazil. Brazil is from my village, so so he's an old, but he runs Balala FM, he's a board member, which is a radio station where I come from. We had this proper, and Martin is here, the chairman of the ethics committee of Editors Guild, we are here. We had this evidence that this journalist also doubles up as a blogger for a governor and what. We straight away always indicate. But that is the decision for a media house. Media council cannot be the first call for example, discipline among. If your journalist has been bribed, you have been given a case, is media council to act first, or should the internal nation standard act first? And those are some of the, we know journalists, I mean, we saw the case of in CI and other places where somebody works for both, and we say, make a decision. Because remember, the code of ethics, the media council accredits any person, whether you work for private media or county government, so long as you are a journalist, we accredit you. We cannot say you go to a card and you can't work. But your media house you work for, if you have, and I know a media house, if you work for them, you are their correspondent in Busia, but you also work for the governor, and they know, your editor knows and has not done anything about it. Yeah. What would the media council do in such cases? You know, so some of these things that we fear. I mean, one editor just told us that guy acts for us. That's how we can make business with the county government. So we have allowed him to work for us and also work for the county, and he's aware now. So some of these things are, when we see CEOs of leading media houses signing contracts with the governors, what is the contract about? I mean, we have seen a lot of our CEOs of media houses making courtesy calls to governors and signing MOUs and memorandums. So then once you have done that, I know of a time when journalists from, I remember the Standard, so in Rift Valley had a lot of big problems. They could not write about any story in the Rift Valley and file it in the Standard. And you know the structures. So that's why I'm telling you that some of these things are beyond journalists. That some of these things, your CEO has already signed an MOU with the governor for whatever reason. Now tomorrow you have this critical article you have done about that account. Where will it run? And the governor, the government, county government has an MOU with your media house.
True.
So some of these things are very tricky.
Let's bring in Martin in this one,
journalists.
because the same question applies to you, especially since you are in charge of that committee and also as a trustee of Kenya Editors Guild. How do you deal with this? And as Victor says, is it just on the institutions or in-house approach first to certain journalists? And where do you draw the line? You've said you're the managing editor or editorial director at the vernacular station in Machakos, so you have a good feel of the pulse on the ground. Where do you draw the line in signing these agreements with county government and still doing your job, informing the public and keeping the powers accountable?
Yeah, I begin saying that we do not have any agreement with any county government. Why don't we have that agreement? Because to sign that agreement is like putting a noose around your neck, that there shall be no advertising. It would assume that there will be advertising when you have such an agreement coming. But in the case of Wayua FM and the region, is that, and this is a matter of concern, you have indicated about state capture. Let me introduce a new concept called the county capture, where governors tend to underwrite the services of our correspondents, such that the news editor has to put his ear on the ground, what's happening in the counties, to prompt reporters, because reporters will say, we didn't hear, we don't know about this, a critical thing happening in county governments. And we're trying to look for a framework of dealing with this, because you want to go through a process where you verify that your correspondents have contracts with county governments, such that when a radio has deployed correspondents for news gathering, the county government, or the governor if you want, has also contracted the same people for purposes of public relations, so that the stories that will come your way are those stories when the governor is making those funny appeals and pledges. You never hear it from those. You never hear it from those correspondents. So this correspondence. So this matter of capture, Victor is saying it's not an easy thing that you wake up in the morning and do. If you remove one block, then other blocks will move. It's not as easy as one would think it would be.
True.
But let me say that what happened with devolution is that corruption came down to the counties. The same executive powers that are out there in Nairobi, they came down to the county levels. And I think county levels are the places to watch, where we require some more robust media engagement. We need to look for a way of engaging county government so that about media houses intimidating journalists. You know, people who think like Victor cannot stay in a newsroom for a long time. I think now, and even previously, because
That's a good point to segue to our last comments. And you have to give you the feedback from our senior Macharia Gaido.
Yes, I've just seen it.
You've just seen it? Yeah. And so he says, I vehemently disagree with Wayua. I led the Kenya Editors Guild delegation to the State House breakfast, which would have no choice but to agree. We had hit dead ends in talks with the ministry and the Parliamentary Committee on Communications around updating the media laws. The obvious next point of engagement was the president. I would challenge anyone to lay evidence proving that however distasteful it may be, there is no alternative to engaging both the legislature and executive when lobbying for favorable laws, be that for media or any other sphere.
Yes, and we have a meeting this week with government editors and senior government officials this weekend. We must lobby. The tension cannot be allowed. We must dialogue. We are a country. And dialoguing does not mean we are being compromised. We must sit on a table and agree. When KDF was going to Somalia, media sat down with government. When Dusit happened second, I was there, media started. So there's nothing wrong and unique. How would you want to accuse journalists of being armchair journalists? At the same time, you don't want journalists to meet with sources. How do they then create this opportunity? So this weekend, we are invited, we'll have a very big meeting between senior editors and senior government for dialogue. This is our country.
Hapo amerukia haraka kweli. You don't want to be questioned. Itakuwa wapi?
Okay.
Itakuwa wapi?
We will tell you.
No, tusisikie. No, tuseme itakuwa the Naivasha declaration ama nini.
No,
anyway,
they are not declarations.
Just fair chance to respond to
Macharia.
Yeah.
Now, Macharia Gaido is a journalist I have a lot of respect for. He
Yeah.
used to be my boss once upon a time at The Nation, and I love his opinion, his courage. He has always spoken truth to power. And he is right. You do need to have these conversations
Yeah.
with legislative bodies. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It has happened before, and it will happen in the past. We've just heard about one taking place this weekend. Here is the difference about that particular meeting. Even if the KEJ went in very, very clear that they just wanted to engage Uhuru Kenyatta about the government policies, laws, and the relationship between media and journalists. Some journalists did not necessarily go there with the same intention. Things worked out different for them.
As he has pointed out.
Exactly, right? So I admire his good intentions. I realize he has them, but that particular breakfast was severely misused.
By
And I
some,
think,
not all.
Yes, by some.
Okay.
And the evidence is there online. I'll go look for it and I'll share it on X for everyone to see.
Right.
But it was definitely a situation that left a lot of us feeling, oh, maybe this shouldn't have gone this way.
Right.
Maybe it should have been restricted to just the senior journalists, right? Rather than having everyone attend and have that cup of coffee. But I don't know.
Okay.
Maybe the gentlemen have something that they would like to add.
Yeah, he's spoken to it. Yeah,
I know
quite
two
briefly.
Kenyan senior journalists who are advisors to a president, a neighboring president, and they advise. You know, we make it look so bad that when, for example, journalist joins government or works with government, how will we get this tools? How will we get the best? And some of these vulnerabilities are individual. The issue of embedded journalists has been Kenyan media for long. Embedded journalists are there for business. I mean, we see a lot of journalists who have joined the big business desks of almost all big corporates come from media business desks. We see PROs who come from some of these sports come. Why is it that when people join government, it becomes a big issue? So I think some of these things is to look at it. I personally believe if you are corrupt, if you have two brothers and you eat alone in your house, you can never have a college where they will teach you anti-corruption. It's purely sometimes how you are brought up, morality and what. And there are people in the newsroom who are good guys, professional, highly, professional journalists who are doing wonderful work. And we can't use 2-3 people who misuse their positions, like you said, to then generalize and say the whole Kenya media is this. You know, that generalization sometimes makes people lose it, because we know, and you have seen it, we know journalists in Kenya. You go to BBC, Kenyan office, 3/4 of the journalists are Kenyans. Go to Al Jazeera, go to CNN, go to Voice of America. We have brilliant, in fact, Kenya now competes with Nigeria in terms of qualification of masters. 24 years of age, average years of a Kenyan journalist, master's degree, we have PhDs in our newsroom, highly winning, almost all coveted journalism awards in this world, including CNNs. And that's a high caliber of people that sometimes is the environment. And Mark, I've asked you this question. Why is it that when Mark is working for Nation or NTV, and when he moves to BBC, he becomes a different, what happened? It's the environment that some of our colleagues are working in. But we tend to ignore that environment and focus on saying the problem is the Kenyan journalists. But many times they have their challenges, and we can say the safety, there's payment issues, there's promotion issues, there are all these issues, corporate terrorism. But I can tell you for free, if Kenyan media was what we describe here, why will government be worried about it? Why would they want to block it or whatever if they are doing one useless work?
Respond to this, and this is from Patrick Gadara. He says, remember when media owners sat down with government to try to shut down live coverage of Raila swearing in? The idea that media meetings with government of Kenya are always innocent affairs is false. Kenyans have really good reasons to be suspicious when the folks meant to be watchdogs sit down with the people they are meant to watch over.
Gadara has his own reasons, my friend, you know, but we can't stop people from meeting. We can't say journalists must stop meeting government and say we have put a block. Because even Gadara, when he writes, he gets stories, some of the documents he quotes is from government. So, you know, you can't say simply because you're a watchdog that because IPOA is a watchdog over police, then IPOA can never meet police. You know, regulators, even Law Society of Kenya is a regulator, but they meet with the people. So we must encourage people to differentiate when people are being compromised, whether meeting government or not, or when you are meeting over. You interviewed the president yourself, Mark. Were you compromised? How much money were you paid? But you are called and told the president is ready to meet guys, and you are mobilized to go and interview the president. It didn't mean you are compromised. So we cannot use any time a journalist meets a government officer or interaction, then it must always be read to mean they have been compromised. I mean, we must also be fair to journalists that for them to get some of these stories, there must be discussions.
Let's see what Bwana Martin has to say about this. First, what Macharia has brought up in defense of the breakfast. I don't know if you were part of it then, and also now.
And editors are meeting every ministries every day, breakfast meetings every day.
Let's give it a second here. And what Patrick brings up saying, Kenyans have really good reasons to be suspicious when the folks meant to be the watchdogs sit down with the people they are meant to be watching over.
True. But I must begin by saying that I attended that meeting. And I am a believer in engaging people. The fact that editors went to State House to have a conversation with Uhuru Kenyatta in a televised interview. We didn't have conversations in the back rooms, and everything that was transacted there was transacted openly, including incidences where some editors, you know, kind of purported to look for jobs. But the open conversation that was led by Macharia Gaido, we placed everything on the table on the issues you were having with government. And I think much as we say we are representing the voiceless people, that we are oversighting government, it can be done at different levels, where we do it on our platforms, on television, on interviews like this, on interviews, news coverage on newspapers, on radio, including talk shows. But because we also have a responsibility as media leaders, and I imagine there are situations where you need to have a conversation and eyeball those people who make those decisions for them to understand what you mean. Like, for instance, the slated event at Naivasha this weekend for media leaders and government. Because as we speak now, we have pertinent issues that require a conversation. You cannot brutalize people and media and not have some form of accountability. Even one policeman charged in court And this brutalization has not just begun with Gen Z's demos. No. When there were these Sufuria demonstrations, media people were hurt. And we have been petitioning government, the police, the DCI, the Director of Public Prosecution, because the media has names of police who brutalized them, for action to be taken. So, and it's necessary to bring these conversations sometimes to a table. We have another burning issue as I speak now. I sat in a panel. We identified members of the Complaints Commission. And the law says when this is done, the minister shall gazette them. And two are not gazetted. And as we speak, the industry requires to have these matters sorted within the, because citizens who have complaints against the media are raising issues, and it is only good to have this committee been in place for a long time. And so when you are just at the tail end of finishing this process, something else comes up, and we need to sort out these things in open conversation. So dialoguing with government, in my view, is good. After all, media keeps on insisting on dialogue.
Yes.
Open conversations.
Asante.
Thank you.
We need to wrap it up. Patrick says to you, Victor, quoting government documents and having ugali at State House are two different things. But Macharia responds to him. Macharia responds to him in the question of, remember when media owners sat down with government to try to shut down live coverage of Raila swearing in? And Macharia says, Patrick, I remember at various fora I have described that pact as the most shameful episode in Macharia says as he wraps up, let's keep the conversation going. Meanwhile, I look forward to the evidence linking journalists who have gone into bed with government to the State House breakfast. We will see. And then now, Ababu Ivan says, I understand each media house has a media policy. Interact with online and otherwise?
Yes, definitely online. So I'm doing it in snippets,
Okay.
as threads, online, aiming for one release a week or one story, to tell. The book in itself, obviously, there's talented people who just want to do a good job. The environment within which they work is extremely difficult, as you've rightly pointed out. You've got financial issues, you've got leadership issues, The other thing I'd like to make absolutely clear, and I've said this in the past, there's a difference between media house worker and journalist.
Big one.
So the journalists are the ones on the editorial floor supplying the content. Media house worker is everyone else around them. So your advertising, your finance, and I have found very much that as this advertising stress on businesses fold, they stop looking at the editor-in-chief as the person in charge of the media house technically, because the editor-in-chief should be the liaison, the one who enforces the code of conduct, the one the rest of the organization listens to. But it has quickly turned into finance and advertising. And this is painful because the policies that they enforce do not work in journalists' favor. So I'm just saying, it's a very tough situation. The next time you see a journalist, please give them a big hug. They need one.
Okay, thank you. Victor.
I look at, for example, the management of some of the media houses where journalists are right from the CEO to the top, and look at others, and you can see sometimes the difference. You obviously start seeing why are people being taken to do, a news editor being taken to do a master's in business administration, not a master's in journalism. And that will tell you that news has become a product for sale, and it's no longer the public good that we expected it to be in journalism. And that has obviously caused a lot of suffering to independent people who thought going to journalism will carry this fortested role. So that's why I'm telling you that some of these things have changed. People invest in journalism as an extractive industry. Come make your money, buy a house in Runda and Karen and move on. Don't even pay your staff. And that's what is happening. I can tell you. Business, journalism is still a very paying media. I have so many of my friends who run media houses. They're making money, but they never invest back in the industry. They will take that money to buy a good car and a car in a house, not pay their journalists. So this is very deliberate, and there are 2 or 3 now media houses that are very consistent in paying their journalists, and you can see the difference in their content. It can tell you. Content is the queen, the king, but it must be professional content. But you can't expect people who are not paid to go and get you good content. So we must rethink in invest. We rather have lean media houses, but have people we pay well to do their work than open stations, 100 stations, because even economically, when the economy globally is not doing well, why is a media house open 5, 7 TV stations? Yet they can't even pay one for one TV station. And this is studies have been done by World Bank and sacking people, especially this retrenchment, never helps a company get out of its mess. And media houses have tried this thing for 100 and it never works. When you put up a structure for people to leave earlier, like early retirement or voluntary, you always lose the best staff. The young, educated, who can take risks, will take their little money and move on. Yeah. So the company remains with those people, pensioners who have given up in life. But media houses keep on repeating the same, sacking young, promising journalists. Then they go back, then after a year, cycle. It's always a cycle. Before elections, we employ, sack 300, come back. That strategy has never worked for anybody. I don't know why media houses keep on repeating the same strategy forever. That is something we must look for ways for content, for monetizing content. Global discussions are now there. Today, Meta has just signed some agreement with Kenya, how content creators in Kenya will be getting money. Media houses need to engage. And that's some of those discussions where editors, media owners need to engage government to help them engage with tech companies on how they will compensate for content to make money to pay their staff. So those are very genuine dialogue meetings that can yield much. We need to talk about, in countries like India, they have zero-rated tax on print. That's why newspapers are cheap. We need to talk to government. The 60 shillings we pay here for a newspaper, nearly 40 goes to taxes. Gotcha. It's only so we need to relook at the administrative tax structures. Importing just broadcast equipment from Germany to these countries costs you hell. Yep. We need to relook at some. They will make the cost of broadcasting content operation cheaper, and we make journalism pay. There's still opportunity for journalism. Journalism is not dying today, but we must think as a team, as an industry, and what to look at media as an industry that employs. Okay. Because we only look at media as a press conference thing, and that's the whole. In other countries, media is a 9 billion industry. You can't look at it. Creates jobs. It does, but here we only look at media as people who will co-opt, will write stories for us, and that's it. It's wrong.
All right. There's still future for the media. To Martin, speaking from KG perspective, from a journalist perspective, from editorial director perspective as well, what your final words are in terms of state capture and if there's any way out.
Media needs to do great introspection to look into the inside, identify things that are undermining our practice from inside. I say this because we tend to get fixated with the mobilization that is being done out there. This is not to say that it is a warring mobilization, but it is necessary for us to do this introspection so that through it we make decisions that are going to inform how we are going to deal with the enemy out there. And the enemy out there, there are so many. They come in many forms. And like I said, as I began, they come in form of government, both local, national. They are media owners. We have business interests. We have corruption. Mm-hmm. We have especially corruption where the brown envelope journalism has refused to go, such that when you go to press conferences, it's like, guys, newsmakers are about to ask you, you know, how much. I don't even think they ask anymore. They just give what they think you're worth, which I think it's one way in which media is wasting.
Right.
So much as we continue being on the front line trying to defend our space. And in as long as media continues calling for transparency in government, accountability among our leaders, in as long as we push for good governance, in as long as we have anti-corruption calls all the time, as long as you are scrutinizing the criminal network, which is all over, and the criminal network gets into politics, into business, into everything. And in as long as you're analyzing this, there's no way you will do this if you're not a respectable person as a media person.
And also
so
look
for
inwards.
Me, I would really want to say that media will need to do introspection in preparation for countering future challenges.
Asante sana. Thank you, Martin. And a quick question to you. First of all, there was one from Yuri. My name is Yuri. I am a journalist fresh out of school, and I'm looking to start my own local newspaper, and I'm looking for some guidance. Print is not dead. Anyone else who has tried? Just a word of encouragement to Yuri. You could give a quick one to that.
Okay, here is what I say, and it's the same thing my father told me once upon a time.
He's a former journalist.
Yes, he's a former journalist. And he said, content and the need for news will never change. It is the formats through which you deliver it that will, right? So India, for example, has shown great progress in its newspaper growth space because they've got higher increasing literacy levels and much cheaper newspapers. So they still have a newspaper market. Once upon a time, there was hope that Kenya would go the same route, but as we know by now, the internet came and disrupted everything and newspapers sort of fell off. However, the content that constitutes newspapers will still be important. I would say, rather than prioritize print, prioritize the content itself. Because print is an expensive venture for anyone, and especially if you're just starting out. Like we said, you need to reckon with a certain amount of space that you have to fill, so you need your head count. You have to reckon with the cost of newsprint, the cost of, the cost of transportation. It's so much easier to just lay out a digital, paper, and you can't do that. It's cheaper, it's easier on the pocket, and it's a great way for a startup. Now, if Yuri is still convinced that print is the way to go, then I would strongly urge that he examines a county approach as opposed to a national newspaper approach. It's a smaller market. You can, test your concept, see what sort of content works for your audience, and then expand from there.
All right.
So,
Viral TKE, Marvin Shege says, founder and editor-in-chief of Viral TKE. Ask Wayua what she thinks about the internal fight in the media, more so between young and old journalists, mainstream and digital.
well, okay, so first of all, I know where his question is coming from. We had a little bit of an altercation on X a couple of weeks ago, so this is a very personal question for
Okay, all right, okay.
But anyway, I will say this. There isn't necessarily a fight, yeah? It's not an age fight, and it's not a digital versus print fight. In any case, a lot of editors and journalists in mainstream media newsrooms are now being forced to go the digital route because pretty much every media house has enforced a digital-first policy.
Gotcha.
And then eventually, because there's so many layoffs, it's so much easier to go and start your own digital concept. I have the failure effect, for example, so I work exclusively online. I've got a lot of ex-colleagues who also started their own news websites. I mean, more journalists are doing that. What it is for me is there's so much stress and internal pressure in newsrooms. Everyone is trying to hold on to their job. Everyone is trying to get a promotion. Everyone is stressed out. It isn't necessarily about you're younger than I am.
Yeah.
It's just I walked into the office and I'm angry, and my source hasn't come through with a story, and my editor is giving me pressure because I have a certain amount of space to fill, and I don't know what I'm going to fill it with, and I can't even headline this story, and there are no, it's a lot.
Gotcha.
right? So that's where it's from.
Asante. I didn't know it came from an ex back and forth. And Masharia is looking forward to, let's keep the conversation going. Meanwhile, I look forward to the evidence linking journalists who have gone to bed with government in the State House, from the State House breakfast. You said you put it on X. The boardroom, if journalism is a public good, the public in the end should pay for it. Leaving it to private entities won't work. We must talk about how public funds news gathering and distribution and what they get back for it. And final word, we must distinguish between media and news. Sometimes use it interchangeably like a synonym. But anyway, thank you so much, Martin Masai, joining us from Machakos and representing the Kenya Editors Guild as trustee as well as Mbaito. And thank you, Victor Bwire, from the Media Council of Kenya, beg your pardon, maybe soon, Media Owners Association. That was also invited for the conversation. They couldn't join us. Thank you, and you're traveling soon, so Safiri Salama. We're looking forward to that weekend meeting that you talk about and what comes out of it. And thank you, Wayua Muli, for your time as well. And what we look forward to what you will be giving to us in tidbits over the next few weeks and months in terms of state capture over time to date. Okay. And we need to look back from where we have come from to understand where we're going. That's it for the social newsroom on the state capture of Kenya media. As you've seen, there's a lot of contributing dynamics to it. It's not just the one journalist. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your contribution online as well as the comments that you've given in. And have yourself a good night. Take care.